The time of business does not with me differ from the time of prayer. And in the noise and clatter of my kitchen, with several people calling for different things, I possess God in the same tranquility as if I were on my knees in church. I began exploring my calling to ordained ministry at about the same time as I got pregnant with my first child, and I began seminary with a 3-month-old baby at home. So I was engaged in two very deep kinds of learning at the same time. I was in seminary learning about becoming a priest, and I was at home learning to become a parent. And it felt like those two kinds of learning were tugging me in different directions a lot of the time. Seminary was inviting me to go deep thinking and deep prayer and deep study. And at home I had this little distraction who was full of needs and energy and ideas. It really came to a head for me when I took a course on teaching others to pray. It was taught by several monks from the Society of St. John the Evangelist. They had a house just down the road from my seminary. And they were teaching us a number of different methods of contemplative prayer and how to share them with others. It was a wonderful course, and they were wonderful teachers. But so many of the practices they were teaching us began with, go off somewhere and take an hour to yourself. There was just no way that could happen in my life. I was a full-time mom and a full-time student of an infant and then a toddler. And I just felt more and more alienated, more and more alone, more and more lost. It felt like the practices of prayer I was learning had no traction in my life. And I felt like if getting closer to God meant spending more time away from my child than I already was, I wasn't sure that was what I wanted. Then one day in class, I was feeling so sad that I actually started to cry a little bit. And in that moment, I felt the Holy Spirit speak to me and say, why does praying have to be away from your son? Why does it have to be something that's apart? Didn't you pray with him? That moment led me to begin to explore a path of finding spirituality, finding prayer in the middle of our everyday tasks, in the middle of the things that keep our hands and our bodies busy throughout the day. And it led me to discover that that was actually a well-trodden path. There were lots of voices and traditions and practices of finding God and finding holiness in our everyday work. One voice I found especially delightful was that of Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence was a Carmelite monk in 17th century France. His sayings and letters were published after his death under the title, The Practice of the Presence of God. Brother Lawrence spent his life working in the monastery kitchen. It was demanding and humble work, but he found in that work a path to intimacy with God. He says, men invent means and methods of coming at God's love. They learn rules and set up devices to remind them of that love. And it seems like a world of trouble to bring oneself into the consciousness of God's presence. Yet it might be so simple. Is it not quicker and easier just to do our common business, wholly for love of God? And that's what Brother Lawrence did. He did his work sweeping the floor or chopping potatoes for a stew or washing dishes. He did that with a consciousness of God's presence and with his heart turned towards God's love. He would chatter away to God as if God were standing right next to him, which I suppose he was. His prayer life was that talking with God over his daily work. Brother Lawrence's great insight was that we don't always need quiet rooms and candles and time apart in order to approach the divine. We can turn our hearts towards God in the middle of our daily tasks and have that be a moment of prayer.